So Coni, our third speaker is Coni Ledesma. Coni is the international spokesperson for Makibaka Revolutionary Women's Organization of the Philippines and a member of the National Democratic Front of the Philippines negotiating panel, where she also heads the Office for the Protection of Children.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Martha. Good evening, everyone, dear sisters, comrades, and friends. First of all, I would like to congratulate the organizers, the Red Sparks Union and other organizers of this event, and also the event tomorrow. I think it's a great job to do, to organize a conference, so congratulations. And March 8th is International Women's Day, so in advance, and we're celebrating it tonight, so I say a very happy International Working Women's Day to all of us. I'm a bit nervous because suddenly the jet lag hit me. I thought I would fall asleep here. I'll start my talk by singing the refrain. I'm not a good singer, but I'll try to sing the refrain of one of my favorite songs. This song was written during the time of Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s by the wives of British mine workers who were on strike at that time. It goes, "We are women, we are strong, we are fighting for our rights, side by side with the men who work the nation's mines, united in the struggle, united by the past, and it's here we go, the women of the working class." I don't know the words for the rest of the song, but as it goes on, it talks about women's liberation and the struggle for women's rights. The reason I like this song is because to me it encapsulates the women's struggle. We are women, we are strong, we are fighting for our rights. But we don't fight alone, side by side with our men, united in the struggle, united in the past. Our struggle for women's liberation cannot be taken out of the overall struggle for justice, equality, democracy, and liberation, a struggle we wage with our men comrades. Otherwise, neither they nor we can ever win victory. We have to struggle together, even as we struggle also for gender equality. And it's here we go, the women of the working class. This is another way of saying, Makibaka, huwag matakot. That is the battle cry of Filipino women activists and revolutionaries, which means struggle, do not be afraid. So that if you go to the Philippines and you hear the women say, Makibaka, huwag matakot, it means struggle, do not be afraid. It's a call to struggle. Today, as we celebrate International Women's Day, which is 2 days from now, it is good to remember that 104 years ago, in 1910, during the Second International Conference of Socialist Women held in Copenhagen, Clara Zetkin, an outstanding German socialist and fighter for women's rights, proposed that an International Working Women's Day be held every year on March 8th. March 8th marked the day when hundreds of women workers in the United States demonstrated for the right to suffrage and to build a powerful garments union. The following year, on March 8, 1911, more than 1 million women and men in Europe attended International Women's Day. They were campaigning for women's rights to work, vote, to hold public office, equal pay for equal work, maternity and child benefits, and better working conditions, as well as for the general upliftment, emancipation, and empowerment of women. We owe our political consciousness today as women, in large part to the women who struggled for women's rights, and to the many, many, many other women who followed in their footsteps. We draw our inspiration and courage from these women as we face ever greater challenges today, as we wage our struggle for women's liberation. Today, our struggle for women's liberation is a struggle against imperialism, class oppression and exploitation, patriarchy, and gender inequality. The oppressive and exploitative policies of imperialism, especially US imperialism, intensifies gender inequality. Policy decisions by government and corporate monopoly capitalism and implementation of these policies by national governments are the huge barriers in our struggle for justice, equality, and democracy. These policies result in massive unemployment, union busting, cheap labor, demolition of homes of the urban poor, migration. In the Philippines, 1/10 of our population have left and are continuing to leave the Philippines to look for work outside the Philippines in order to find a better life for themselves. There is increased landlessness for the peasants and indigenous people, and greater economic burdens for the large majority of the population, especially affecting women. Huge cutbacks in government budgets on housing, health, education, and other social services have reduced access to health services and education. Women and children are especially affected by these. The neoliberal policies of privatization, deregulation, and liberalization have affected the lives of thousands upon thousands of women and men. Let me give you an example of the effects of privatization as it affects women in the Philippines. The example is about the privatization of a government hospital. This is the Familia Memorial Hospital. This hospital is the only government maternity hospital in the Philippines. It is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, government maternity hospital in the world. Privatizing this hospital means that the present hospital will be torn down and rebuilt within the compound of other hospitals. The maternity hospital will only be part of an overall hospital. It will no longer be a maternity hospital. Because it will be privatized, the cost of health services for women will be much more expensive, preventing the majority of women from availing of the prenatal care, giving birth in a hospital, and postnatal care. And by the way, in the Philippines now, they say it is not privatization, it is corporatization. Because that's a new word. Women in the Philippines are of course protesting this. They are demonstrating and demanding that the Familia Memorial Hospital remain a government hospital. They bring out the effect privatization of the hospital will have on women. But so far, the plans to privatize continues, as the protests and demonstrations also continue. Imperialism means war. If we need any more proof of this, we just have to see the ongoing wars of aggression in Iraq, Afghanistan, the continuing war in Palestine, and occupation. Syria, now Ukraine, Colombia, you name it. I mean, it's all over the world and other parts of the world. The Philippines is important to the United States because of its strategic geographical position and because of its rich natural resources. To ensure that the United States are maintained, the interests of the United States are maintained in the Philippines, there is an increasing U.S. presence in the Philippines, quietly encouraged by the Philippine government. I say quietly because since 1991, the U.S. bases have been thrown out of the Philippines through a majority vote of the Philippine Senate because of a powerful anti-bases movement. But subsequent to that, treaties like the Visiting Forces Agreement now allow U.S. forces to come in to visit permanently, having been signed by the Philippine government with the United States. The recent Typhoon Haiyan was a good reason for U.S. troops to come in to do so-called relief work. More than 5,000 U.S. troops came in right after Haiyan. They went to the devastated areas of Haiyan. They went up the mountains all over, especially because we know that the armed struggle and the guerrilla movement is quite strong in the places where Haiyan hit. And then quietly, they are no longer there, or they are no longer seen. There is no real evidence that they have left, or if they have officially left, there are several hundreds of them still there. This is what they do after joint military exercises with the Philippine military. They supposedly leave, but several hundreds of them stay on. There are several sightings of them in different places in the Philippines, but there is never an official recognition that they are there. President Aquino is now negotiating what he calls an increased rotational presence of U.S. troops, warships, planes in the Philippines. Former U.S. bases in Subic and Clark are being readied for this. Part of the preparation is the springing up of entertainment and hospitality areas outside Subic and Clark. This means increased prostitution, sexually transmitted diseases, rape, and sexual assaults. Already the pimps are going to the provinces affected by the Typhoon Haiyan because of the extreme poverty there, and they are recruiting girls as young as 14 years of age and women to go into the hospitality industry in Subic and Clark. And we know that increased U.S. presence will also mean increased human rights violations, especially against women. Again, this will not happen without protests, demonstrations, as well as educational campaigns, especially in areas where there will be open, increased U.S. presence. If imperialism is the biggest obstacle to women's liberation, it goes without saying that fighting and defeating imperialism is the way towards women's liberation. When liberated from the oppressive and exploitative system, and the building of a system that is non-exploitative and non-oppressive, the conditions are created for women to be equal to men, to improve themselves, and to take part in the reconstruction of their country and their lives. As I said at the start of my talk, our struggle for women's liberation cannot be taken out of the overall struggle for justice, equality, democracy, and liberation, a struggle we wage with our men comrades. As I said, neither they nor we will ever win victory. We have to struggle together. But we also have to struggle for gender equality. The obstacles to women's liberation are rooted in the oppressive and exploitative system, which is profit-oriented, and where the wealth of the country is in the hands of a very few, while the rest of the population, men and women, bear the heaviest economic burdens. So, this is a class struggle. That is why we have to struggle together. When the oppressive economic, political, and cultural burdens have been lifted, there will be real liberation. Of course, the struggle for gender equality takes place during the entire struggle. So what are our tasks as women in struggle? First, we ourselves must become aware of the political, economic, and cultural forces that oppress and exploit us as women. Let us study the events around us, analyze and understand them. Then let us awaken the political consciousness of other women, those in our family, our friends, our neighbors, our co-workers. As many women as we can. The more women join the struggle, the stronger we will become, and the stronger and hopefully sooner US imperialism can be destroyed. Let us join movements, women's movements that are anti-imperialist. We have to help build a movement that will educate and arouse women and men on the rights of women, especially the struggle to overcome all forms of economic and political oppression and discrimination, and that will fight for women's rights. Let us join organizations that are active in working for social change. We cannot expect big change to come in a few days or a few years. In the Philippines, the revolutionary struggle has been going on for over 45 years. Many of our early founders have gone on to their eternal rest. Through the years, many have suffered arrest, imprisonment, disappeared, martyred, or given up their lives. But the struggle continues. There are always new forces, younger blood with the same kind of daring and commitment. They push the boundaries. They push the struggle forward. Let me conclude this talk with a story about Loretta Burrows. Loretta was an anthropology student in the 1970s. She was a student activist, and she began to see the importance of politicalizing and mobilizing women to participate in the struggle. Together with other women activists, she founded Makibaka, a revolutionary women's organization. One of its first activities was to picket a beauty contest. In 1973, Makibaka became one of the founding members of the National Democratic Front of the Philippines. Today, it is still very active. I know because I am a Makibaka member. In 1972, when the dictator Marcos declared martial law, Loretta and other Makibaka members joined the revolutionary underground. Loretta joined the New People's Army. She was captured, escaped from prison, and rejoined the New People's Army. In the meantime, her husband had betrayed and gone to the side of the government. And so when she joined the New People's Army, she asked to be assigned back to the area where her husband had been one of the commanders of the New People's Army, and she herself became a commander of that unit. In 1976, Loretta was killed in a military encounter. She was wounded in battle, so she told her other comrades that she would cover for them so she could escape. The military officers came and they killed her. But Loretta did not die in vain. Today, there are hundreds of thousands of women who are politicalized, who are activists and revolutionaries, members of Makibaka and other revolutionary organizations. Many have become members of the New People's Army. Loretta Burrows' legacy lives on, as does the legacy of so many other women and men who have given up their lives fighting for the liberation of their countries. So we too, we must continue to struggle for a just and truly democratic society against patriarchy and gender inequality, and for the full liberation of women. I will conclude my talk quoting the song I started out with, and it's here we go, the women of the working class. Or to translate, Makibaka, wag matakot. Struggle, do not be afraid.